And great. So welcome everybody. My name is Kayla Knoll. I work with the Career Center as one of our career community advisors. I work with the business entrepreneurship and consulting career community, and I'll let the rest of our panelists introduce themselves today.
Hi everyone, I'm also with the Career Center. My name is Emily. I work with our employers in the business entrepreneurship and consulting career community, and I'm excited to talk to you all today about managing stress in the job search.
Hi, I'm Akin Ogumbameru. I'm the career ambassador for the Bear community. You're welcome.
Hi, I'm Brittany Sorrow. I'm a peer health educator in the Office of Health Promotion and Wellness. And today I'm very excited to talk to you guys about managing stress and job searching.
And my name is Peter Wildcrea. I work with Brittany in the Office of Health Promotion and Wellness, also as a peer health educator. And yeah, we're all really excited to be here to talk about wellness and job searching.
So today, how it's going to work is the group of us have already started kind of coming up with some of the questions that are really common that all of us kind of have seen in the past, both in job searching on the career side as well as kind of on the health promotion side. So we have those kind of preset. However, if you have questions as we move forward, please don't hesitate to put them into the chat, and we're happy to answer them kind of as we go along throughout the presentation. And I think that's all the logistics needed before we get started. Anything else that we should add, group?
That sounds good.
Cool. Okay, so let me share my screen. So here we're going to be managing search. Great. So the first question that kind of comes up is, what are some common stressors or anxieties experienced while job searching?
So I think a lot of times folks talk about things like just feeling, I think there's just a general stress that comes with sort of job searching. It can be a very nerve-wracking process, and there's a lot of information to work through. Things like that.
Yeah, most definitely. I think that in kind of a job search, it is really common and really normal to have people start getting anxious around job searching. Pretty much anything in future can cause anxiety that pops up, and having that kind of come into your life is totally normal and like something that should be expected. If you don't have some kind of anxiety that pops up, like, are you really interested in that position? Like, are you really wanting to be part of that job?
Yeah, Kaylin makes a great point. Like, anxiety is kind of meant to be this like ecological kind of motivator for a lot of us to kind of face fear and deal with fear and in kind of like a self-protective way. So I think some anxiety in the process is definitely very normal. It shows that you care about the position that you're applying for. And then I think in any situation where you're being evaluated by someone else, you have a lot of that anxiety of wondering if you have all of the qualifications needed, or how you might stack up against the competition. So I think that those are some common anxieties that I've personally experienced or that I've seen with a lot of the students that I work with.
Cool. Okay, so now we got that one out of the way. What are some holistic ways of using self-care tactics to manage stress?
So I think understanding that stress is sort of, it's something that often comes with the territory of a job search. I think that's a really good first step. And so once we're able to like acknowledge that, okay, well, feeling this stress is normal. And the reality is a lot of people who are going through this process are feeling this stress. I think one of the important things is knowing that you can reach out for help. And knowing that there are resources at DePaul and externally that are here to help and support you. And today we have some awesome people from the Career Center and from Health Promotion and Wellness, which are both two really, really great resources, particularly when it comes to job searching and stress and managing the stress of the job search. I think both of you or all three of you at the Career Center are well versed in students being a little bit stressed through this job search. And so that's a really great resource to help, I think, sort through some of that stress and the practical aspects of it. And if it feels really overwhelming, HPW is always here to either listen and support you or to direct you on to some other resources that can support you really well.
I also think that realizing that there are multiple forms of self-care, just kind of listening to yourself and what do you need? If you need to take a step away from your search and maybe you need to enjoy some physical self-care, maybe going for a run or taking some time to get in tune with yourself, or mental self-care, doing a check-in. It's really important to always check in on what you need and where you are, because there are multiple forms of self-care. There's physical, emotional, financial. There's so many forms, and just listening to what you need can really help with guiding that and managing that stress that comes with looking for a job. So if there are other stressors in your life that are bothering you, maybe kind of approaching those and forming different self-care methods to deal with those will allow you to have a clear mind when it gets back to your job search. I also agree with Peter. There are so many resources, and I think utilizing your resources is a great way of self-care. Understanding that you don't have to do this by yourself, that there are resources at DePaul, such as the knowledgeable people from the Career Center here today, who really want to help you and ensure that you are on a good path and you know what you need and you know where to start looking for your job search.
Yeah, and the thing that I would add is self-care obviously is that first step, but then what is the next step kind of after that? And I would say that comes into goal setting, that stress is really normal, but there's ways to start alleviating some of that stress or making it manageable by setting some of those goals and what you want to achieve. That sometimes inactiveness is like a symptom of stress, where it's like, I am so stressed out, I'm just not going to do anything. I am going to sit there and watch hours and hours of TikTok. Totally there. I've been there. We've all been there. So it's kind of realizing that that is the common point, that, okay, instead of just sitting here and doing nothing, I'm going to set a goal that today I'm going to look up 3 different jobs and try to network with 2 other people. That is setting some of those goals that are achievable and measurable and easy to attain. Makes it so that that stress kind of de-escalates because you have your path, you have the way that you're supposed to start moving forward.
And I think, Kaylin, kind of you already touched on this a little bit, but part of what can be really challenging is just taking the first step. And I think that sort of resistance to doing anything is the hardest resistance to overcome. And once you sort of get your feet wet, once you get into it a little bit, it's oh, well, I'm doing this, so now I can do this. And I think steps sort of naturally fall into place, but sometimes taking that first step can be a really big barrier.
I completely agree. There's this saying of putting a dot on a page, and that's, when you think about that in your job search, even if it's just one little thing, if you're putting a dot on a page, if you're, editing your resume, or you're applying for, like Kayla mentioned, a concrete amount of positions per day, I think that is a great goal to work towards. And I think also a lot of our mental health practitioners here today will advise routine is super important in kind of managing stress and self-care and just kind of, for your overall mental health. So if you can find a way to fit your job search into a routine, whether that's kind of noticing when you're most productive or when you have the most energy, I think that'll help you be successful and not get overwhelmed if you're kind of building in a half hour per day or an hour per day into your schedule to spend time on that. So that way you're not feeling that stress and pressure during the times when you're allowing yourself leisure time or time to work on homework and things like that.
Yeah, and I think just to go off of that too, that routine is really important, because when we don't set a routine, sometimes it's easy to push things off to the last minute and let a bunch of work or applications pile up. And when that happens, it's not only going to create more stress, but you're probably going to be sleeping less, or you'll be constantly thinking about it. And so getting things like getting really good sleep, eating well, getting outside and exercising, all of these things are not only good for your body, but they're going to be really good for your mind, and they're going to help you feel less stressed and more composed in not only the initial short term of I'm starting this job search, but in the what is a really long-term process of the job search, which I think is important to remember that this isn't going to happen, you know, in one day. You're not going to, chances are, you're not going to apply to a job and hear back in 24 hours and, you know, be working there the next week. So it's important to remember that you got to kind of pace yourself and not, it's unrealistic to think you're going to be able to do a thorough, good job search in one day.
Yep. And then the last thing that I would kind of tack on is that recognize that feeling stressed is very similar to the same feeling that you have when you are excited. That anxiety is like makes your body and bloods and you start sweating, but you also have those same feelings when you are super excited. So sometimes like sitting down and actually processing through like how I'm feeling and kind of going back to what Brittany said around self-care, like do a self-check-in to be able to say like, well, what are the feelings am I feeling? Is it only stress or is it also like this excitement and wanting to be able to move forward? So just kind of be aware of that as well. Cool. Okay, so that's next step. How can I effectively job search if I have a long-term diagnosed mental health problem, such as major depression or generalized anxiety disorder?
Well, so I think one of the things that's important to recognize, especially if you know that you are struggling with something like depression or general anxiety, is that the job search process can be stressful and it can be anxiety producing. And so I think it's important that going into it, you recognize there might be some challenges here for me. And there might be some days that are going to be a lot tougher than others, not only because the job search can be challenging and stressful, but because I also am having to try to manage my depression or manage my anxiety. And those are both super normal, super common things that a lot of us struggle with. But I think that if we can recognize going into the job hunt that this is going to be stressful and it's going to be an additional stressor on top of my normal day-to-day stuff, I think that's a good first step to being able to move into like a long-term healthy place where we can both job search and manage whatever other challenges we may have in our own personal lives.
I agree. Rome was not built in one day. Being kind to ourselves is really important. The job search process is a process. It takes a while. And making sure to take care of yourself is the most important part. Utilizing your resources, using the people at the Career Center who have the knowledge in that sphere to help you deal with some of the anxiety that comes from looking from that job. So that doesn't compound with your general anxiety or your general depression. And also realizing that there are other resources here at DePaul. We have University Counseling Services, which is a great resource to come to if you need that help in that aspect. And then we always have our office, Health Promotion and Wellness, and we would love for you to come and talk to us, and we can help in any way possible. But I think the really important aspect is being kind to yourself, understanding that you have to take your search at your pace. And like Emily said, maybe building that into your routine is a great way for you to get a little bit done each day or a little bit done each week. So you have actionable steps, working toward an actionable goal at a pace that works for you.
Yeah, I think that that's like really great advice in there, and like anticipate like an issue, like, oh, if I know that these are triggers, how can I start putting things into place now so that if those triggers do happen, it doesn't completely take me off the rails. Some of that includes like making sure that you have an active therapist or an active counselor. Like that is one of the easiest ways to be able to say like, okay, I have somebody that I know I have this meeting with every single week and we can talk about whatever's going on. Just having that small piece can be super helpful to make sure that you are taking care of yourself and like knowing what is needed to be successful.
Yeah, and like Kaylin mentioned, like a lot of therapists have training, at least a little bit of background in career counseling as well. So if you're, open and honest with your therapist about where you're at, that you are job searching, they can help, kind of work on a plan with you to make sure that you have all the tools that you need to cope with the stress so that it doesn't get in your way of moving forward with the job search. But like everyone mentioned here, it's okay to acknowledge if you're in, not the best place and that you need to take some time to get everything else together before you can move forward in the job search. I think that it's really important to be honest with yourself and where you're at in the situation and making sure that you have all the resources you need.
Cool. Okay, so let's move on. So how do I develop my personal brand? I'm stressed out about the idea of having personal brand or professional identity because I don't know what it should be. Great. I would say this is one of the most common ones that pop up. Just kind of having that area of unknown kind of pop up of like, well, how do I present myself in the best possible way? That is a total stressor. And some of it comes down to utilizing the resources as we kind of talked about today, but also starting to think about like, what is it that you're bringing to the team? Like, what is it that you're bringing to that future professional or future organization? And when you start kind of thinking about those aspects and about what you need to be successful, suddenly you start figuring out, oh, this is who I am. This is my personal brand that I want to kind of bring to the table that can help start navigating down that path. And the other thing to recognize is that it's an ever-growing thing, that your personal brand is never going to kind of stay stagnant or like be the same. It's going to change and be different as you change and become different. So just recognize that it's kind of part of the process to not necessarily know exactly what your personal brand is all of the time.
I think that's a really good point that you bring up, Kaylin, too. And I think that's something that is honestly really valuable to employers as well, is being able to see this trajectory of growth, and especially if you can come into, and you can reflect in an application or come into a job interview and be able to say, well, 2 or 3 years ago, this was really important to me in this, but in the last 2 to 3 years, here's how I've grown and here's how I've changed. And here are some of my reflections from that. I think that's a really valuable skill that you can not only like sort of utilize and develop for yourself and to market yourself as best as possible, but is something that I think employers find really valuable, is that sort of adaptability and growth mindset that you can bring to a team that you might be joining.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, your personal brand, it sounds kind of like this nebulous thing of what really does that mean? Like, how can I kind of nail that down? And really at the end of the day, it's kind of a simple thing. You can start by asking some of the, people that you might have worked with at, part-time jobs or internships, how would you describe me? What would you say are some of my professional strengths? And then kind of getting that audit and that feedback and seeing, is that really what you want your personal brand to be known for? And I think there's a lot of empowerment in knowing that you can shift your own professional identity to kind of help you meet your goals. And I think that there's a lot of really great resources I'm going to share in the chat right now as well on identifying what your personal brand is. So I just sent a worksheet that walks through how to, nail it down. It's really about experience, skills, background, and passion. So all of those things together. And then I'm also going to share, there's another resource on social media and your personal brand, because, a lot of employers do look you up before deciding whether or not they want to hire you, whether that's on LinkedIn or other social media. So definitely being aware of that. And then personal identity and your brand, because we're all, multifaceted people and we have a lot of layers. And I think it's important to think about how you can really be yourself at work. And you should feel empowered to be that person. So just know that if you're not sure of what your brand is, there's a lot of resources to kind of help you work through what that is and shape that in the future.
I agree. I think personal brand is kind of this intersection of talents as well as experience. And experience doesn't necessarily mean like on the field, or not on the field, in the field job experience, because as someone who's still in school, I've had to like bring some of my academic experience into to supplement the things that I don't have in the field currently. And then also supplementing that with my personal talents, acknowledging where I have skills in and what I'm passionate about and how I've used that maybe in the classroom or even in my on-campus job or in some other interpersonal experiences that have helped me, and how I can use that and bring that to this field and this job is a great way of looking at your personal brand and thinking about what can I use that perhaps isn't conventional, but really works to push who I am and what I can bring to the table.
Awesome. Okay, so with that, what should I do if I see a position that are entry level, but they require 2+ years of experience? I'm stressed about actually finding an entry level job that I'm qualified for. I'm worried that I don't have what employers are looking for.
I think this question really piggybacks nicely on what Brittany was just talking about leveraging your experience in the classroom and leveraging those projects that you've worked on. Because really 2 years of experience is kind of an arbitrary number. Employers put that because they're just kind of looking to cast a wider net. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't apply if you don't have that exact, number of experience in terms of the, full-time years. You can really kind of equate that to mean, a few different internships or part-time jobs, or it can be a little bit more of a malleable thing than just the full-time 2 years of experience. So when in doubt, if you see something that you have, like I would say even, 40 to 50, 60% of what the job description asks for, might as well just apply and see kind of where you land. And I think that's where networking is really important to figure out, like, from the employer, what they're actually looking for, what skills are important. So that way you can be better prepared in the interview process. But it's always really important just to kind of shoot your shot, but be prepared in that process.
Yeah, if there's one thing that, like, if I can name a #1 worry that pops up, especially during workshops or during presentations, it's this question. Like, I'm worried that I don't have what the employers have. How do I kind of navigate through that? So it's really common to be able to have this. And like what Emily said around, like, just go for it, see what happens. Now there's a big difference also in like settings your standards where they should be at, where it's like, if they're looking for 10 years of experience for a job, okay, maybe you're not, like, maybe that's not realistic. So also being aware of like what's realistic in this, where if you're able to look through all of the job description and be like, oh, I'm able or have done these different things in my class, great, apply for the job. But if there's some of those where suddenly you're managing 20 people, okay, maybe you need a little bit more experience to be able to do so. So just be realistic in your approach and don't discount the experience that you have had. Because the whole point of going to college is to gain experience. Employers don't care where you get the experience from, they just care you have it. So use what you have, like take advantage of the things that you're able to kind of work through and know that you are worthy.
I think that's a really good thing to keep in mind, not only for as you're sort of trying to market yourself to employers, but just for taking care of yourself throughout this process too, is being able to like be realistic and say, and Kaylin, you touched on this in our first part of the series, that was more the short-term stressors, but like being able to say, realistically, I'm probably not going to get a whole lot of responses to the applications I send out. I was the number 1 in 100 or 5 in 100 responses.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think going into it being realistic, thinking and knowing that if I send out 100 applications, chances are I get 5 responses. It's a good way to sort of prepare yourself and protect yourself and be realistic from the get-go and know that this might not happen immediately. And I think with that too is knowing that we're all going to have weaknesses when we're applying. And just because we have weaknesses doesn't mean, Kaylin, just like you said, doesn't mean we're not worthy of this job or any other job. It just means that there are some things that we're better at and some things that we don't have quite as much experience with. And we still have a lot of time, especially if this is your first job out of college. Like there's still so much more time beyond this job. This is really going to be such a such a small piece of the larger picture that I think it's important to be realistic as you enter into this piece of it too.
Yeah, and I would probably add, kind of to further that statement, even along those lines, that I can't remember if this is one of the questions that we have in here or not, but a lot of times people are like, well, how do I like set myself above everybody else? Like, what is me giving me a distinction? Sure, there's lots of things that you can do to like make it so that you are a better candidate, but you're never going to know if you are the best candidate ever. Like, there's always going to be somebody that could be better than you or could be worse than you. The big thing to recognize is you just have to be the best you. Like, if you are presenting yourself the best way possible in the best manner possible, that's all you can do. That there's nothing more, nothing less that you can do. And if you're doing that each and every time, you're going to find the right fit. Like, you're going to find the right company that's like, yep, that's exactly what we're looking for. Even if you're not the most qualified candidate, you're the best fit for that position.
Yes, absolutely. And I think like working with employers, one of the most things they're looking for is that you're trainable. So like Caitlin mentioned, being a fit is so important, and just being able to demonstrate your personality and what you bring to the table in an interview, that's what builds connection. And I just think back to some of the job interviews that I've had that that ended up going well, were the ones where I felt like, you know, I got to really connect with the interviewer in a professional sense, but also they kind of got to know a little bit about me and my personality as well. So I think that's important to keep in mind, and just being able to demonstrate situations where you've been trainable in the past. Maybe you didn't know a certain skill, you know, at first, and then you've learned it on the job. Those are great ways. And if you think of those stories, those are great ways to kind of work past your weaknesses and show them as just, you know, situations where you've learned. And that's really what employers want to see.
I think the other thing too is that I think it's important to remember this idea of being a fit for a company. Because if like in, you know, ideally you get the job, but that also means you're going to have to work there. And so outside of just the job search, you might be there for a year or 2 or 3 or 5 years, you know? And so ensuring that the place you're applying to is a place that you actually want to work at, I think is important, because this period of the job search can be really stressful. But if you get a job, that's going to be at least another probably year, probably longer of your life. And so it's important to make sure that the places that you're looking for are places that are going to make you happy and make you feel fulfilled, and aren't going to like be these soul sucking jobs, you know, that will allow you to take care of yourself as you start working and move down the line.
That's so important, Peter. Company culture is so important. Just even in our own office, the culture there is something that I look forward to going every day, and that has done so much for my mental health, especially in this period where we're all kind of at home and it's dark and like it's getting gloomy outside, and just knowing that like there are people I like look forward to going seeing at work, but also knowing that this first job is a place where you can gain that experience. So kind of utilizing the tool that you have and the experience that you have to get that job, but then understanding that you will get that experience eventually somehow, some way. You just have to get your foot in the door somewhere. And then you can always cultivate skills or experiences from other places and use those as stepping stools to get to that next place where you want to be. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, on that note, how do I best organize my job search? I'm overwhelmed by the number of positions I've applied for and keeping track of what I've submitted so far and to whom.
Spreadsheets. That's my personal answer. Spreadsheets are amazing, at least in my experience. But however you best stay organized is best for you. So for me, that's spreadsheet. For you, that might be a grid chart on a piece of paper that you kind of just fill in when you have an application in, or when you have heard back about an interview or things like that. It's kind of a personal niche thing to find out how you best organize your job search. But I personally recommend spreadsheets, maybe making some kind of template that works for you, just where you can tick in boxes. I've turned in my application. I've heard back about an interview. I've followed up. I've done X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, and to go off of that, the Office of Health Promotion and Wellness offers one-on-one appointments. And so if organization is something that is really hard for you, and I know for me, that's something I've struggled with in the past, we have folks at professionals at HPW, and I imagine the Career Center does as well, that are really good at this stuff and know different ways to sort of help you get organized, and we'll be able to help you, I think, work through your own preferences and find out and really pinpoint like what's going to work for you. And because like Brittany said, like it's an individual thing. And so the way Brittany organizes might not be the same way that I organize, might not be the same way that Emily organizes. And so I think it's important to remember that it might take a little bit to really hit your stride of like how you're going to figure it out, but that there are resources like the Career Center, like HPW, that are here to help you figure out what works for you.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to now take a very different direction. So if Emily or anybody else has anything to add specifically to this before I move off in a different direction.
Yeah, I was just going to say spreadsheets are what works for me, and also managing my calendar and making sure my Google Calendar's up to date and using alerts, blocking time. That's just basically tips that I've kind of been able to find to be helpful.
Cool. Yeah. So the direction that I'm going to go off in is I want to pay attention to I'm overwhelmed by the number of positions I've applied for. And the fact being that if you are overwhelmed by the number of positions you've applied for, then I'm worried that you are not being picky enough about the positions you're applying for. That I said this, like, I've said this so many times in different places that now it's just like, have I said this before? That job searching is a lot like dating, that you could literally go outside of wherever you're at right now and go to every single person that you run into on the street and ask them to go out on a date with you. The likelihood is that you're going to get people that say yes. They're going to be like, yeah, sure, I'll go on a date with you. But do you actually want to be on the date with that person? So it's the same thing with a job search. You can go on to LinkedIn or Handshake or Indeed and just click the easy apply buttons and apply for hundreds of jobs and be so overwhelmed where it's like, I am getting phone calls and conversations and emails from positions I don't even remember applying for. Yeah, that's totally overwhelming. That's like totally normal. But maybe it would be better to have a different approach a little bit, to instead be really intentional about where you're applying. And like do a little bit of research into the company that you're interested in and actually like do a targeted apply, because then that's going to shrink your numbers, which a lot of people are like, but what if people don't respond to me? You're going to have a better likelihood of getting somebody to respond to you if you know you're a good fit and have shown that you're a good fit for that company versus just applying with a very generic resume or cover letter or whatever and hoping. Because that often doesn't work. Like it makes it so that you do get more anxious and it's more anxiety inducing than it is actually helpful and like actually going to get you a position. So be aware of like not getting overwhelmed and like being more intentional in your search as well. Okay, cool. Let's move on. So I'm starting a new job or internship remotely, and I'm worried about how I can get to know my team and stand out in positive ways. I want to build connections, but I'm unsure of how to go about it. Good question.
This is something I can relate to so much. I've actually never met my team in person. I've never met Peter, who's also one of my coworkers. Originally, it was kind of hard because you're like, well, how do I like do these collaborative projects with these people I have no idea anything about? I think it's just a little bit about reaching out and be like, hey, hello, I'm excited to be working with you. I'd love to get to know you. Maybe setting some kind of Zoom after hour event with your coworkers and taking that little time to get to know each other. Something I mentioned earlier was company culture and just kind of understanding like what happens like outside of the office. Maybe your coworkers already have some kind of event or something that they do every bi-weekly or every week, and seeing how you can fit into that. But I think just reaching out to people is your best way to just kind of get to know them off the bat.
I think too, recognizing from the start that virtually it might take a little bit longer to get to know some of your coworkers than it would if you were in person. I think that's just sort of the nature of the territory that we're in right now. And so knowing beforehand that it might be a little bit of a longer path to getting to know some folks that I might otherwise get to know a lot quicker. But in pursuit of that, being intentional about like finding dedicated spaces where you can just chat with coworkers. So like Brittany talked about, like if people already have things set up, awesome. See if you can get involved in that. If not, maybe folks would be interested in doing like a virtual game night or something together. Or even just like in the middle of your day, if you see someone has lunch at the same time of you, saying like, hey, like, do you want to chat virtually over lunch today? And really trying to find like spaces where you can actually talk to your coworkers outside of just meetings and the sort of scheduled Zoom calls that you might have day to day.
Yeah, and I would add that, as Peter said, it might take a little bit more time to be able to build up that culture. So also like be aware of like how you're feeling and seeing if there's other places that you can get some of that connection, even if it's like, hey, I might not be getting this connection from my colleagues, but maybe I can get it from some of my friends or in other ways and shapes, so that as that's building, you're still getting that connection and you still have that feeling in that, because it is normal to like go into a remote environment and be like, wow, I feel off. I'm not getting the connection that I need. I'm talking to all those extroverts out there that need constant connection. And even some of those introverts where they're like, well, now I'm really removed and I can't interact. Like, how am I supposed to do this even if I wanted to? That it's totally normal to be feeling that way. And with that, don't be afraid to like talk to your boss about that. That if you are having some of those kind of problems or issues that pop up, to be able to be honest with your boss, being like, hey, I'm comfortable with the work that I'm doing, but I'm not necessarily feeling as connected. Do you have some suggestions or ways in which we can like work together to make that happen? And then suddenly it's their idea to like say, hey, group, we're going to be doing this after hour thing. So be open and honest with the people that you're around, and they're going to be more likely to connect with you.
Yeah, that's great. I think what Kaylin said is a great example of a way to positively stand out in this situation by taking initiative. So bringing up that conversation to your supervisor or teammates and just kind of showing that willingness of wanting to get to know them genuinely, I think will make a really great first impression remotely. I also think, looking in to see what your company offers in terms of like ways to get involved outside of like the day-to-day 9 to 5. There might be like a volunteer project, like remotely. There might be employer resource groups, or like at DePaul, there's, a women's group that I'm involved in, not, super actively, but they do like a book club and they do like conversations with speakers. So it's a great way to kind of get to meet people outside of your specific team. And it's another way to just kind of learn more about the company culture.
Awesome. Okay. So how can I best balance working from home, going to school at home, and leisure time? I often continue working past my scheduled hours because I'm not sure what my employer is expecting of me.
I would say setting boundaries is very important. Working from home and managing school from home has started off difficult because I would always work in one place. I'd work in my bedroom. I've learned my bedroom is off limits when it comes to anything academic or like as far as work goes. So I've found other little places around my house where I can kind of sit and focus in on that. But as far as like working overtime, this is something I am sometimes guilty of. You have to remember to like set boundaries. There's ways on your email where you can send like I'm out messages. So I'm not in the office. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Or I know my boss at the end of all her emails has my working times are not always your working times, so don't feel pressured to like respond back. Or you can even just kind of like turn off notifications for emails. That might be best, but finding the way and taking the initiative to set boundaries is really important, especially as it comes to like mental health and then work-life balance.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think as we're working from home and virtually, it's a lot easier to push those boundaries further and further, or to not have them exist at all. And so I think it's a lot easier to say, oh, I'm just going to work 10 extra minutes a day. No, I'm just going to work 20. And it sort of snowballs into eventually you're working an hour extra every day than what you need to be, or what you should be, or what's healthy for you. And I think that's really common too, and especially in like first jobs, is that people come in and they're super excited and they really want to like prove themselves. And so they work, and they burn out. And so I think it's important too that as you start a new job, you find a really healthy balance of I'm working and I'm getting everything done and I'm doing a really good job, but I'm also taking care of myself, because we realistically, we can't work 24/7 every minute that we're awake. We need to take breaks. And ultimately, when we take breaks and we take care of ourselves outside of work, chances are when we come back into work, our work is going to be higher quality. And that will likely make you stick out more than working for nonstop forever.
Yeah, I think that you kind of did like a key piece there, and it's like that check-in piece. Just like right at the very beginning of what we talked about, the very first question, like, how do I manage like that mental health or manage self-care? And it's checking in with yourself kind of throughout that process, that starting a new job is very overwhelming. Like there's just so much that goes into that and so many new things that you have to learn, that it's easy to start feeling overwhelmed. That you have to take that minute to check in and say like, is all the feelings that I'm having because I'm overworking? Is it because I'm learning everything new and it will ease as I start learning things? So really doing that self-check to be able to say like, okay, why am I feeling the way that I'm feeling? And like making sure that you're intentional to kind of start addressing this. This is a really common thing with a lot of the students that I end up advising, or like alumni that come back to talk with me, that they are going into public accounting, and in public accounting, it's normal to be working 60, 80 hours a week. And at first they thought, oh, that's totally no problem. And then like reality happened and they're like, oh, wait, maybe that's not exactly what I want to be doing. And it's like, okay, so what are some ways that we can like work together to start going through that? So just being aware of that, and don't wait until, as Peter said, you burn out and be like, I can't do this anymore. And then you have like a mental breakdown or like emotional breakdown or anything along those lines. Do it early and often, so that you can keep on top of what's going on and comfortable with where you're going.
I also think clarifying your employer's expectations is a good way of knowing what boundaries need to be set, and like knowing that, oh, I am perhaps doing above and beyond what I need to be doing, and that I can take a step back and take some more time for me, and making that not disclosure, but that difference between work and home and life.
Great point. I think the expectations piece is definitely important depending on your industry. Like Kaylin mentioned, there are industries where overworking is more common, unfortunately. But it's important to like really prioritize your day to day and think about what are some things that are more time pressing, and really focusing in on those. And there's always, I think, a great rule of like, if it takes less than 5 minutes, just do it, so that these little things don't end up piling up on your plate at the end of the day, and you don't forget these like important deadlines. So I think just taking an audit and kind of looking in to see what are some things you can quickly knock out and be done with, so you can work a little smarter instead of as long as you've been working.
Awesome. Okay. When should I start looking for a new job? I'm unsure how long is expected to stay at my first job out of college. How do I job search while having a job?
I feel like when you feel like you should leave, when things don't feel right and you're kind of over it, or when you get that inkling where maybe I want to grow and maybe this isn't the place I need to be anymore, maybe that's the time where you should maybe start looking. Um, Ultimately, of course, a job is a job, but a job is somewhere we spend a lot of time. So you don't want to be somewhere you hate. I feel like it's important that you kind of have this balance between work and also I feel like I'm fulfilling some sort of purpose and I'm doing what I need to be doing. Um, yeah.
I think that's a really good point, and I think that's where this check-in piece comes in. And I think that's why we bring it up right away with even from the job search from the get-go is like building that habit of checking in with yourself is really important because I think that's a really strong indicator of when you should maybe start looking for a new job. You know, if it's a long day or a long week, you know, I think that happens in most jobs. But if you are starting to see like every day I don't want to go to work or I'm like dreading going to this place or logging on to to work or like I this place just like the people that I work with I don't like, nothing here is bringing me any type of joy or fulfillment. I think doing those check-ins day to day so that you can sort of measure where you're at and be really cognizant of like how am I feeling day to day in this workplace. And when I think when the good or the bad days start to outnumber the good days, that can be I think a good indication that maybe you should be thinking twice about this place and looking for somewhere else.
Yeah, I think Peter did a great job of describing that too, of like when the job that you're in starts impacting your mental health. That's definitely a really important time to start kind of being honest with yourself and kind of your career plan. And I think things aren't the way that they were, you know, like let's say like 40 years ago where people would stay in positions for 20, 30 years at a time. A lot of employers kind of expect that folks will move on within a few years. It just really depends on the position. So it's hard to kind of give like a direct time frame of how long is expected within this question. But I will say job searching while having a job is definitely, people say the job search is like a full-time job. So just kind of acknowledging that it will take a lot of time out of your day and to plan for that, to not let it kind of interfere with your responsibilities at your job. Obviously, you want to make sure you leave a good impression at that employer, but building in, you know, time for interviews around like the lunch hour, you know, you can always feel free to, you know, be honest with your employer about when you might have an appointment. That's something that is, unfortunately, we can't always be super open with our employers about the fact that we're job searching. So, you know, kind of keeping things vague and saying that you have, you know, an appointment, that is something kind of that I would say is pretty standard in terms of how to schedule interviews throughout the day. So just kind of making sure that you're building in that time, but you're not letting it take over your day-to-day responsibilities.
Yeah, and the one thing I actually want to talk about the opposite side of it as well, when you might like jump to the conclusion that, oh, it's time to job search. Like Peter kind of mentioned it. I think everybody have mentioned it a little bit where it's like, if you have one of those bad days and you're like, oh, I need to job search, get me out of this place. So also doing that check-in helps to like realize, is this truly what I'm feeling or is it just in the moment? That oftentimes you might get a project that you absolutely hate, but there's all this other piece of the job that you absolutely love. So making sure that you are taking that moment to like think through and realize that there's ups and downs for any job and not just to make the jump, just to make the jump, that sometimes it does feel really overwhelming when you're first learning a new job. And it might feel like, wow, I made a total mistake. So also give it a chance. Like recognize that it's maybe not an instant, easy gratification, that it might take a little bit of time for you to really get into your job. So be aware of that as you're kind of being conscious of like your job search and how you're feeling. But then also I would suggest getting that vent person. And by that, I mean not a colleague, not a boss, somebody that is not any way associated with your job that you can talk to about your job, so that you're able to say, wow, this is a horrible job, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, wow, that's totally understandable. And they are also usually the person that points out, you've been saying this about for 2 or 3 months now. Is this like just this project, or is this the job now? Or, hey, you're kind of being in your head a little bit. Maybe you need to take a step back and recognize the good things that you are enjoying about this. So that's an easy way and something to also be aware of, is it time to job search? So don't jump to conclusions too fast too.
Is there a general minimum time though that you should try to stay in a position?
So I would say that there's probably not a specific minimum. There is a specific rule in terms of your resume, that on your resume, I would probably suggest not putting something on there if you've been there less than a year. That really an employer can be explained, oh, I left my last job and just haven't found anything before that. That's explainable. But in terms of like a minimum time that you're supposed to be at a job, if you go into a place and you're like, wow, this is like a toxic culture, great. That's totally understandable to be like, deuces, I'm out. Like, this is not worth it, even if you've only been there a week.
Yeah, I agree with Caitlin. The toxic culture piece is really important to evaluate, and also like the relationships you have with your colleagues, your supervisor. If there's anything, occurring that you're thinking is unethical or even abusive, there's no, shame in needing to get out, sooner than a year. But I will say it really does depend on the industry too. Like a lot of folks in the tech industry, it's a little bit more kind of acceptable to bounce around from job to job, maybe even a little quicker than a year. Depending, that can sometimes honestly demonstrate to employers that you might be a desirable candidate because you're being sought after by different firms. So just kind of knowing your industry and knowing what's expected of you as a candidate is important. And that's definitely something you can do some research on. Obviously, in the Career Center, we're here to help you with designating what that might look like. But I think it's definitely like an individual kind of circumstantial situation where we would want you to come in for career advising on that.
Yeah.
The only thing I wanted to add, just going back to Kaylin, your point about having someone to vent to in a job that's maybe stressful initially, is I think that's a super good thing to have, and it's really necessary for all of us. But I think it's also important that we pay attention to how we're feeling after maybe venting to someone, because I know one of the things that one of our staff professionals in the Office of Health Promotion and Wellness, her name is Katie Bellamy, and she's a licensed counselor, and she talks about a little bit like paying attention to how you feel after something, because I think a lot of times our sort of the way we talk about things or outward expression of things can also, sometimes it can be really good and be a super just sort of like a good way to release some of these pent up feelings, but sometimes it can perpetuate and create those feelings. So just being aware of like how we're talking about these things and trying to keep a positive mindset, even in the context of like, oh, this is a really tough situation right now.
Well, I just looked at the time and realized that we are at 4:59, so we probably should be wrapping up. I know that went really fast for me. I can't speak for the rest of the panelists. But if you have more questions about any of this, the Career Center is always here for you. I know the Office of Health Promotions and Wellness is always there for you. University Counseling Center is always there. We are happy to be resources for you. Our job is to make it so that we can help you be successful. So please don't ever hesitate to reach out. We want to be able to be that resource for you.
I'm going to drop a link in the chat that will kind of walk through the different options that you have for making an appointment. If you want to talk about this individually, or if you want to do a drop-in, or even just have your resume reviewed, there's lots of different options that can best fit your schedule. So definitely make sure to check that out. Also too, I wanted to share, we have a LinkedIn group as well. And we're always posting jobs and events such as this one in that. So I'm going to share the link. So make sure to join us and you can stay kind of plugged in.
And I also,
Go ahead, Peter.
cool. I was just gonna say, I also just put in the chat the link to our office's homepage. And so, like Emily said, the Office of Health Promotion and Wellness is always here for you, always here to listen and willing to listen. So feel free to make an appointment with any of us. We're always happy to talk.
You can also find us on social media at Healthy DePaul on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great one.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.